Hello, W200 students. Welcome to our second class session, Thursday, 1B. Going to talk through a little bit about standards and objectives and also walk you through some of the things that are included in this Thursday's module. So as always, please make sure to watch the video all the way through and then of course let me know if you have any questions. The plan for this video, we're going to talk about academic and technology standards, which are not always the most exciting topic, but they are an incredibly important topic. From there, we're going to also discuss learning objectives and a little bit about assessment. I'll introduce you to your second badge, which is the concept map. And we'll also talk a little bit about your third badge as well. And then we'll wrap up by just sort of summarizing what's going on with this Thursday module and what's due when and where. So in general, let's just start big picture. What is a standard? What is an educational standard? A lot of times standards get sort of a bad name. You hear the expression teaching to the test a lot. And there are schools that sort of rigorously adhere to everyone teaching the standards in the same way at the same time and things like that. But in general, the idea of a standard is just that students should be able to know a certain thing by a certain point in time. And the standards aren't meant to dictate how you teach those things. They're just sort of broad goals that we as an education community have come up with and said, these are important things for our students to know. And you may have heard of the Common Core standards. These are pretty common across the U.S. now. Most of the states have adopted the Common Core standards. Indiana is a little different. Our standards are very similar to the Common Core standards, but Indiana decided that they didn't think the Common Core standards were rigorous, so they created their own. But by and large, they're really, really similar to the Common Core standards. Those are on the academic side. On the technology side, we also have a set of ISTE standards, International Society for Technology and Education. These standards talk about how teachers should use technology in the classroom to support learning. And Indiana also just passed computer science standards for K-8 teachers. So if you're on the elementary side, you end up teaching in Indiana, you will be expected to integrate computer science into your future classroom as well. So we'll talk a little bit about that today, but also throughout the semester. But big picture, standards define the knowledge and skills that students should possess at critical points in their educational career. By the end of first grade, students should be able to whatever, multiply or triple digit addition and subtraction. Things like that, specific skills and knowledge that students should have. Just a brief history and background. You've maybe heard of No Child Left Behind Act. That was one of the biggest federal initiatives to sort of start getting schools across the U.S. on the same page. Before that, a lot of things were decided more at the local and state level. No Child Left Behind was setting up accountability measures to kind of get everyone in the U.S. on the same page in some ways. That was replaced by the Every Student Succeeds Act in 2016 under the Obama administration, and that's still in place today. The idea with Every Student Succeeds was to sort of give a little more choice back to the schools and let schools decide more about how they would be assessing themselves rather than it being decided at the federal level. Based on the ESSA, you get reading and math tests in grades 3 through 8, also once in high school. The data is broken down between subgroups, English language learners, different racial ethnic groups, things like that. But the big part here that was different from No Child Left Behind was that states get really wide discretion on setting their goals. They get to decide what standards to hold the schools accountable, what the consequences are if they don't meet those standards, how to intervene in low-performing schools, and things like that. So this is the current federal act that's in place now that sort of determines how schools need to approach accountability for what students are learning. Like I mentioned before, there's two sets of academic standards. If you're in Indiana or if you're planning to teach in Indiana, you'll have the Indiana academic standards, which again are very similar to the Common Core standards, which are used in most states across the U.S. Here's just a quick look. You can see it's like 8 or 9 states that have their own state-based standards, and then most of the other states have adopted the Common Core standards. But again, in states like Texas, the standards are still similar to the Common Core standards. There's a lot of similarities across all of them. So why do we even need academic standards? One is to make sure that students are learning what they're supposed to learn at a particular level. I'm sure you all had a teacher back in K-12 who maybe had a passion project where you spent sort of months focused on Egyptian pyramids or something like that. And so like maybe that was really fun and engaging, which can be great, but maybe you also, missed out on learning grammar or something because of it. So the idea is we need some level of consistency across our schools in terms of what students should learn at what points in time. And this is an evolving conversation. It's not like the things that we valued 100 years ago are the things we value today. There's a lot more focus today on problem solving skills and what are called 21st century learning skills, things that students need once they leave school. So these aren't static over time, but it's still important to have a set of goals and standards that we want our students to reach and that are consistent across different schools. The other point is we want to clearly measure student outcomes. So are students learning what we think they're supposed to learn, in other words? We want to establish measurable goals, and that also helps improve student learning outcomes as well, because we know what we want them to learn, and so we can see, did they actually learn that? Whenever you see this link, this icon, you'll want to add that link to your Symbaloo page. You created a Symbaloo account in 1A. So anytime you see this, or anytime you find a useful link at all, always add it to your Symbaloo. It's a great way to keep track of links. We're going to jump right now over to the standards so I can show you a little bit about what they look like. But you should also make sure to Symbaloo this website. All right, so if you ever are trying to find this page, just go to Google and type Indiana Standards. Or you can also type Common Core Standards if you're outside of Indiana. So this is the home page. You'll want to go to just your subject area, English Language Arts, Math, Social Studies, whatever it might be. And you click on it and you'll see for elementary folks, you've got the harder task of having to look through all the different subject areas. But then for secondary, you would just pick your specific subject area. So let's say we go to second grade English Language Arts standards. And what you can see is you've got these different learning outcomes and standards that students should be able to accomplish at their grade level. That first number is their grade 2. So this first one says, for reading, foundations, demonstrate an understanding of the 5 components of reading to build foundational reading skills. They've got phonics-based standards, fluency-based standards, and then you go into literature. So are they able to understand main ideas of a text? Are they able to describe how characters in a story respond to major events? Describe the overall structure of a story, like the plot of a story. So these are all the specific skills that students leaving second grade English Language Arts class should come away with. And as a teacher, you'll be asked to make sure that your students are meeting these skills. And as you can imagine, that can be a difficult thing to keep track of. Fortunately, technology has really helped us improve the way we keep track of student progress, especially in regards to the standards. So that can be really, really helpful in making sure your students meet the standards that they're supposed to meet. All right, let's jump back into the slides. All right, so make sure you've added that website link to your Symbaloo. Specifically, if you want to add the link to your specific area standards, that would be great. Also, make sure in general for this class, you've got an idea of the subject area you want to teach in. and the grade level you want to teach at. This isn't locked in for the rest of your life, but for the purposes of this class, it's good to have that idea so that you can focus, because all of our assignments are going to be focused around your specific needs, so you'll want to have that in mind. Also, for later, for your class prep 1B, and for the concept map, and for the badge 3 you'll need to find a standard in your area. So find something that you're excited to teach about, that you're interested to teach about, something that you think is really beneficial and fun for students as well. But take, a little time, read through all the standards, and pick one that you're like, ooh, yeah, that's a good one, that's a fun one, I'm looking forward to teaching that standard. So make sure that you take some time to pick one after you watch this video. Sort of already talked about this, but the numbering of standards, you definitely don't need to memorize this or anything. That first one's the grade level. The second one is the set or part. So these have different meanings depending on the area. And then the last number is what number standard it is in the category. So what are your responsibilities regarding standards as a teacher? Well, like I mentioned, you need to make sure that all of your students meet all of those standards, which is a really, really hard task. Everyone comes to your classroom with different needs, different abilities, and how do you differentiate your instruction to meet all those different needs? Technology can be super helpful there, but it's one of the consistent challenges that today's teachers face, and we'll talk about it a lot throughout this course. Plus, you have to find ways to document that your students are actually meeting those standards. And we'll, again, be looking at these throughout the semester. So in addition to those academic standards, you also have technology standards that we should address as teachers as well. And so we've got the ISTE standards, like I mentioned. These talk about how students and teachers should use technology to support learning. But we also now, for K through 8 folks, have these computer science standards in Indiana as well. And lots of states are moving towards integrating computer science into the curriculum also. The ISTE standards for students. What should students be able to do with technology? How can they become more empowered learners, digital citizens, knowledge constructors, innovative designers, computational thinkers, creative communicator, and global collaborator? These are really, really important skills for students to leave school with, because this is what the modern workplace is expecting students to be able to do. Students need to have these skills to be successful in our digital world. You hopefully watched that Shift Happens video, and you saw just the enormous expanse of knowledge that is happening. And for students to be able to work in an environment with so much happening all the time, connected across the globe, you need to be able to have these types of skills. Additionally, teachers need to foster and support the development of those skills for their students. So part of the ePortfolio project, you have hopefully created the shell for it already, but you have a ISTE standards page, and this is where you'll be documenting how you've met all of the different ISTE standards for educators. And we'll get into that more, but you'll showcase, hey, here's the things I've created, and here's the specific ISTE standard that this meets, to show that I know how to use technology in my future classroom. These are those specific skills that you'll be showing. You'll be showing, I know how to continually improve my practice. I know how to seek out opportunities to support student empowerment, how to positively contribute and responsibly participate in the digital world, be a digital collaborator, designer, facilitator, and how to analyze data to drive my instruction. So you'll be showcasing that you know how to do all of these different things over the course of the semester. Finally, I mentioned that K-8 teachers now have computer science standards. So we'll have a whole unit on this, but just know that if you're going to be teaching K-8 in Indiana and in an increasing number of states, you'll be asked to teach computer science standards. Also, usually this gets integrated with math and science, but we'll have a whole unit talking about this. These are the states that currently have computer science standards. You see a lot more states are in progress, and that number just continues to increase. All right, so we've talked a lot about our standards, the things that students should know at certain points in time, But how do you know if your students have actually met the standard? Well, that's where learning objectives come in. And you may have had a teacher who, would write the learning objective on the board at the start of each class. That's becoming more and more common in K-12 schools, so that it's making things a little more transparent and letting students know, hey, here's the goal of today's lesson. We're going to learn whatever it is. So when you're working with any learning activity at all, you should always have a learning objective. These are statements that define the expected goal of the curriculum, the course, the lesson, the activity in terms of demonstrable or demonstrable skills or knowledge. So it's something that the students can actually show that they know. Maybe that means writing an essay. Maybe that means doing a matching activity. Maybe it means creating a video, delivering a presentation, having a debate. Whatever it might be, students have to actually do something. In other words, objectives define how you will know when students have reached the goals you've set for them. So that's what learning objectives are, and we'll be working with those in this lesson also. Throughout the School of Ed, you'll have different ways people break down learning objectives. Sometimes you'll hear they should be SMART, specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, and timely. We try to keep things really simple here just for starting out. We know this is folks' first time usually working with learning objectives and standards. And we think it's more relevant to what teachers actually do in the real classroom. So when you're thinking about learning objectives, think about what you want your students to know, how they're going to show it, and how you're going to measure it. And if you focus on those three things, you'll be good to go. So some examples of what do you want your students to know. Basic single-digit addition, causes of World War I, how to conjugate the verb tenere, elements of a strong persuasive argument, approaches to solving story problems or word problems, what are the steps to scientific inquiry, what are the requirements for an art critique. So these are the types of things you might want your students to know at the end of a lesson. Next, you want to ask, how will your students show that they have learned that knowledge? So maybe they're completing a worksheet of single-digit addition. Maybe they're listing the causes of World War II. Maybe they're completing a table of verb conjugations. And so this part of the objective, what you want your students to show, that should sort of be central when you're writing it out. The student will be able to list the 5 causes of World War II. The student will be able to correctly conjugate the verb tenere in the present tense. It's specific in that I'm saying exactly what I want the students to show me. You don't want to use verbs like the student will understand the solar system. That's way too vague. Don't ever use the word understand, or the student will learn how to. Too vague. Say exactly what the student's going to do and how they're going to show it. And then think about how you're going to measure it. The students will correctly list all 5 causes of World War I. The students will complete a verb conjugation table with 80% accuracy. The students will write a strong persuasive argument using the 4 characteristics of persuasive writing we've discussed in class. So think about how you're going to measure what they've learned. A lot of times this involves rubrics if it's more complex creative projects as well. So earlier I said you're going to need to pick a standard. So after you pick your standard, you'll also want to start thinking about some learning objectives for that standard. So if your standard is the students will be able to identify the main elements of a story, think about what the learning objectives might be surrounding that. And like I mentioned, don't say the student will be able to understand. Instead, you want to use following types of verbs. Don't use these. Use verbs that can be measured, like these. And there's a link to this in the module also. But the students will be able to explain, they'll be able to draw, to identify, to label, to recite, to solve, to critique, to combine, to compose, to categorize, to analyze, to sketch. These are really, really awesome words. These are broken down by Bloom's taxonomy, which you will learn about more throughout your time in the School of Ed. But it's essentially the different levels of knowledge, starting with basic, all the way up to more advanced evaluation. So these would be simpler, lower level thinking things that students could do, all the way up to very high level thinking here in the evaluation category. So when you're working on objectives, always use these types of verbs. Here's another example. Same thing. As you move up from knowledge to evaluation, these are the types of verbs you want to use, and these are the types of projects that you could have them do on the top. So the last thing to talk about is that measure or assessment part. We've started with the standards. These are the things that you have to teach your students. From those standards, you want to create learning objectives. The learning objectives will address what you want your students to know, how they're going to show it, and how you're going to measure it. So now let's talk about that measuring or assessment part. So I want to start that with this sort of silly example because I think it relates to something that's really common in the education world. So it says, crunks live in graphite. They need the graphite in order to zigzag. The graphite must be heated to 135 blah blah to be consumed by crunks. The graphite is Hixer and Auckland. Once the graphite is heated, the Auckland makes the graphite dirty. Once the graphite is dirty, the crunks will be able to properly zigzag. So obviously this makes no sense at all. It's a lot of gobbledygook. The words, they're not real words. But if I asked a question, where do the crunks live? And we went back, my guess is that you could answer that right now. Crunks live in graphite. The point is that students can see questions like this. Why do crunks need the graphite? They need the graphite in order to be able to zigzag. But they don't know what any of that means. So they could get 100% on an assessment like this and have absolutely no idea what they're talking about, what those terms mean, the importance of it, the relevance to their own lives. So it's really important for us as educators to think about how can we move beyond assessments like this that aren't really getting at any real knowledge and move towards things that can be more beneficial and really show that students have learned something, not that they're able to just regurgitate something onto a multiple choice test. So our challenge is to find ways to actually assess students' knowledge and abilities. And that's a big challenge. So to address that challenge, your second badge will be to make a concept map. And your first badge was to create that Chatterpix. Hopefully you also watched that video on YouTube that was just an introduction to what these badges are. But if you haven't, make sure you watch that. In general, the badges are just little skills that demonstrate your ability to do something with technology. So the first one was, hey, look, I can use technology to create a little welcome Chatterpix thing. This one will be, hey, I can use technology to create a concept map. So over the course of the semester, you'll complete 10 of these different badges. On a lot of them, you'll have a choice as to which one you kind of want to do or which tool you want to use. These are some examples of concept maps. You've probably worked with them before. This is the Declaration of Independence, broken down, when was it created, the intended audience, 3 observations about the source content. This is breaking down expository text structures. This is the path of the red blood cells for all the science folks out there. This is brainstorming a portfolio. So you get the idea. They're graphical ways of organizing things. Great for elementary. Also, the classic Venn diagram comparing two things about similarities and differences. So these can be really, really handy across all grade levels and across all subject areas. They can be helpful for you to organize your own thoughts on things, and they can be helpful for students to demonstrate their understanding. So for this badge, you're going to pick a tool, either Poplet or Kidspiration Lite, which is a free desktop or a free iPad app. Poplet you can use on any computer with the web. And there's tutorials for both of these linked to in the badge assignments. And what you're going to do is start with that standard that you picked before. Then you're going to come up with 2 objectives from that. From there, you're going to come up with 1 activity for each objective, and then 1 assessment for each activity. So let me just show you what that template should look like. And you can move things around in a different way or whatever, but you'll start with your standard. Think of 2 objectives based on that standard. Think of 2 activities that students could do for those objectives, and then think of 2 assessments. So for example, this is 8th grade English Language Arts Standards that says, analyze the purpose of information presented in diverse media and formats. So one objective might be the students will be able to list and identify different media formats and motives. And the other would be the student will be able to present an explanation for why one media format may be more effective than another given a certain situation. So this one's a little more basic on the left. This one's a little more advanced, higher level thinking. So for the activity, students will go on a media format scavenger hunt using QR codes around the room. Over here, students will create a presentation arguing why their selected media format is more effective at influencing opinion than others. And then for your assessment, the students will complete a scavenger hunt worksheet, which then the teacher could grade. And then for the presentation, students will be graded on presentation ability, citations, logic of the argument, and it could go on for a lot more. But the main point of this activity is to learn how to use a concept mapping tool, but also be thinking about this alignment from the standard through the objectives, through the activity, through the assessment. We should have a clear alignment between all of these on this path. And so that's one thing that you'll really want to focus on, that make sure that all of these are connected back up to the standard that you started with. So that's badge 2. You'll create this and then you'll upload a screenshot or an image file of the badge that you created. And then let's wrap up by taking a quick look at what else is going on for this module. The video you have watched right now, the Bloom's taxonomy, those are just the verbs we were talking about. So when you are writing objectives, make sure you're using these types of verbs. Use that standard to complete badge 2, which we just talked about as well. After you create that badge, go ahead and tweet out the image of your finished concept map. There's one other thing that should be added in here, which is complete class prep 1B. So that will be, this is probably where you're watching this video anyway, or in our announcement, but you'll want to make sure that you complete that class prep. There's 3 short articles on different technology tools you can use for assessment. So check those out and explore any tools that are interesting to you. We've got a Flipgrid discussion again, which is to talk about how you can use technology to conduct and support assessment. So make sure you post your thoughts on that and then reply to each other's. And then for badge 3, you'll actually be creating an assessment. A lot of folks are already familiar with Kahoot, so you could use Kahoot. You can use quizzes, which is similar, or you could create a Jeopardy game with this really cool Jeopardy Rocks resource. And when you're doing that, be thinking about that Crunk the Graphite example. Be thinking about questions that aren't just having students regurgitating what they know, but actually demonstrating their understanding in more meaningful ways. So you can always find this Google Doc from our homepage in Canvas. It's that big link at the top if you're ever looking for this. It's always being updated a little bit, so if you have questions on it, definitely let me know. But hopefully that's clear. I'm trying to do everything in just very clear step-by-step things. Do this, do this, do this, do this. Again, I know it's a lot because we are working in the 8 weeks for the summer. There's a whole lot condensed into this time. So it's really, really important to stay on top of things and not get behind. If you're struggling with anything, if you're having trouble finding things, if you're confused by anything, definitely just let me know, and I'm more than happy to help. You can always send me an email. We can set up an online meeting. Whatever you want to do, I'm happy to help. So that's it for this video, and I hope you all have a great rest of your week, and let me know if you have any questions.